favorite features of the conference. CIS SEED Talks, Ideas Worth Cultivating. To kick off the segment, I'd like to call to the stage Cara Flores-Mays. Cara is the founder and the director of Duk Duk Goose, Inc., a Guahan nonprofit that aims to equip the next generation of protectors through Indigenous media that affirms Indigenous identity and amplifies Indigenous voices, stories, and knowledge for Guahan and worked in culture-based media for over 10 years and is an Obama leader Asia Pacific.
Hafade, on behalf of my fellow Obama leaders from Guam, Regine Bisco-Lee, Austin Sheldon, and Julian Uggan, I'd like to welcome you all to CIS SEED Talks, Ideas Worth Cultivating. This year, SEED Talks is being held as a legacy project of the Obama Foundation's Leaders Asia Pacific program. It is my pleasure to first introduce Dr. Maya Soetoro for an opening message. Dr. Soetoro is a consultant on the international team at the Obama Foundation and a faculty specialist at the University of Hawaii. Previously, she was the director of the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii, where in addition to leading outreach and development initiatives, she also taught leadership for social change, peace movements, peace education, and conflict management. For many years, she worked at the University of Hawaii College of Education, where she taught multicultural education, social studies methods, and peace education at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. Maya sits on several voluntary boards and is the co-founder of the nonprofits Seeds of Peace, the Peace Studio, and the Institute for Climate and
Hafade, aloha. Thank you so much, Cara. What an honor it is to be here and to be with all of you. I'm so proud of all of you Obama leaders, and in fact, all who are participating in this conference. On a global level, we're undeniably in a time of some crisis and turmoil, and we have to be really serious about caring for one another. And I feel that you are doing that today. You're helping us to find a state of courage and compassion and awareness. All of you island leaders are exemplifying these necessary qualities. As far as the Obama leaders you'll hear from today, I really think they're exceptional human beings. They make the difficult done and the improbable possible, I like to say. They do so in part by breaking down silos between peace building, climate justice, and economic justice. They have common sense, they have creativity, they have determination, they're effective, they're fun, they're community oriented, inclusive, inspiring, mindful, and really supportive of one another. They use radical imagination to visualize more resilient, just, and inclusive futures, and then make them real inch by inch through transformative policy, grassroots advocacy, community source solutions, educational interventions, and artistic reimagining. So I'm really grateful that they're part of our community and my extended family, and I'm so grateful to be here today to spotlight them and their work as part of this conference. So I want to thank you and the University of Guam and all who have organized this conference.
Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Te Puoho traces his heritage to the Ngati Toa, Ngati Fatua, Ngati Tama tribes of Aotearoa. A graduate of Stanford Business School and a Fulbright scholar, he is steadfast in his pursuit of holistic prosperity for New Zealand's Indigenous Maori. As executive director of Te Pūtea Whakatupu Trust, Te Puoho pursues targeted social change within a traditional values-based impact framework. The trust's philanthropic and investment activity targets outcomes in 3 priority areas: education and training, traditional and scientific knowledge systems, and leadership development. He holds diverse governance roles focusing on social impact, including with tribes, indigenous businesses, and social impact intermediaries. His role as an Obama Foundation leader for the Asia Pacific region has given him a global outlook on leveraging global best practice within an indigenous values-based lens.
Kia ora, everyone. I'd like to pass my regards on to you, Maya. It's an honor to have you here with us again, and also to the University of Guam for the invitation to take part in such an auspicious event. If I could have the first slide come up, please, for my kōrero. Fantastic. My name is Te Puoho Katene, and it's my privilege to be on the panel for these ideas worth cultivating today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Ten years ago, I was sitting on a boat floating just offshore in a small town called Oita in southern Japan. My work colleagues and I were all fishing for breakfast. I felt that telltale tug on my fishing line, and with one sharp pull, I was reeling in the first catch of the day. A nicely sized shimaji, or a trevally, a great fish for sashimi. I leant towards my colleague who had pulled the fish onto the deck and quietly asked him to return it to the water. Now, perplexed, he asked me why I would put back such a good eating fish. And my response was, the first fish is always for tangaroa. Next slide, please. Kia ora, everyone. Firstly, let me introduce myself in the ways of my ancestors. Whitireia is my mountain. Parirua is my harbour. Kapiti is my island. Puarangatira is my ancestral house. My tribe is Ngāti Toa, and my chief is Te Rauparaha. Under these auspices, I am Te Puoho Katene, and it is my privilege to be here today. The islands are rising. When I hear this, I hear the resilience of island nations amidst black seas of uncertainty, be they economic, environmental, or social. Next slide, please. Mostly, I hear an echoing of the aspirational goal for New Zealand's Indigenous Māori, tino rangatiratanga, or self-determination. Like many, I have spent my career in pursuit of self-determination for my people. In this pursuit, it has proven true that sustainable change cannot be given. It must come from within us, organic and native to us. And if we are to aspire and pursue this lofty horizon of self-determination, it must be authentically and unapologetically ours, both in design and in execution. So on this theme of self-determination, today I thought I would speak to three ancestral wisdoms to which I hold dear, slivers of our collective legacies that can help move us closer to determining our own fates. And what's more, Indigenous wisdoms and beliefs are coming to the fore and resonating in communities and economies, calling for change around the world. An opportunity lies before us to rise to meet that call. Next slide, please. Ancestral wisdom number one, taiao ora, tangata ora. Where the environment thrives, so too do the people. Māori view the world through a web of interconnectedness. All things, animate and inanimate, descend from Ranginui, the Sky Father, and Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother. Their offspring are our deities, our atua. They are the embodiment of the surrounding world. And the denizens of the land and seas and forests and rivers are their descendants, including we humans. Everything that we see in the living world is related. It is this familial lineage that forms the tapestry of human interaction between each other and within the natural world. Our prosperity is intertwined with that of our surroundings. We have an obligation to each other and to the environment born of our genealogy. Where the environment thrives, so too do the not self-interest, but hereditary obligation that drives us to embody this statement. Mankind cannot prosper at the expense of our environment. Next slide, please. Ancestral wisdom number 2, the shift from extractive to reciprocal economies. In an age of rampant economic growth and privatized wealth accumulation, there can be no doubt that the tether that ties human economic activity to our environment has been frayed. Extractive economic practices have essentially kicked the rungs of mankind's ever-steepening economic ladder out from underneath us. And despite reaching dizzying heights, we are perched precariously and vulnerable to shocks. Now, I started my talk with a fishing story or between us and the world around us. It is not enough to just take. We must give. In a reciprocal economy founded on Māori values, money isn't the sole currency. Indeed, when the actors are human, we can consider the currency to be the accretion or the conference of mana, the authority, dignity, or prestige of an individual or a group. With the natural world, it is mauri, an ecosystem's innate ability to create and sustain life. This wholesale mindset shift is in order to transition to a system where all the economic activity takes place in the pursuit of collective prosperity. That is the prosperity of individuals, groups, society, and the natural world. Next slide, please. Wisdom number 3, are we being good ancestors? Ladies and gentlemen, we are children of the Pacific. We are the product of 1,000 years of explorers, risk takers, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and visionaries. Considering that vast legacy, and now consider that we are the new ancestors for the generations to come, and we must act accordingly. Make mokopuna decisions every day. That is, decisions with our grandchildren at their heart. Whatever our intergenerational strategies are, they must be reflected in how we act and interact with each other and the world around us on a daily basis. Now, what do I mean by mokopuna decisions? Let me give you an example. When I consider investments, Western best practice tells me that $1 today is worth more than the same amount a year from now. The old adage that cash is king, sooner is better, and so on and so forth. But being a good ancestor requires that I prioritize making $1 for my mokopuna over making $1 for myself in the present. So how do we reconcile these types of dissonance between the incumbent thinking and intergenerational thinking? My tribal organization, called Whakatupu Incorporation, has a 500-year business plan called Te Pae Tawhiti, the distant horizon. It has 5 underlying tenets that remain resolute in defining our collective prosperity across time. That is, in the time of our ancestors, present day, and for future generations. And we know that we were being hugely ambitious by setting our horizons out to 500 years. But in the face of such world-altering climate change, let's be ambitious in pursuing lasting impact. But having a grand 500-year plan isn't enough. We need to act intergenerationally all of the time. Next slide, please. Now, I've spoken today about 3 ancestral wisdoms, and I wish I could speak more because there's so much to share. But I believe that these 3 wisdoms represent key elements that lead us towards self-determination from an inherently Maori or an indigenous worldview. We are fortunate that the traits required to create such a future follow a blueprint laid for us by indigenous economies worldwide. But there is much work in front of us. Now, I acknowledge that the present and future headwinds that assail our societies are daunting. But as Hemingway said, the world is a beautiful place and worth fighting for. I look forward to a future where mankind gives due deference to the living world, where the economic activity is contextualized in our ability to meaningfully impact people's lives, and a world where our future descendants are put at the heart of all of our decision-making. Self-determination is that distant horizon to which we aspire. And if we hearken the words of the Maori activist Eva Rickard, who said, "Somewhere in my past is my future," we will see that this journey to this aspirational horizon isn't a new one. Our ancestors have borne us along this path since before we were born. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the words of my ancestors, ka tau te manakitanga o te runga rawa ki a koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Thank you all.
Thank you, Te Puoho. Kirsten Brosbøl is the CEO and founder of 2030 Beyond, a do tank for the 2030 agenda, working to accelerate action on the Sustainable Development Goals. She recently launched the initiative Parliamentarians for the Global Goals, a global network of parliamentarians who work on the 2030 agenda. She is a former Minister of Environment and Member of Parliament in Denmark, where she founded and chaired the Danish Parliament's all-party group on the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2019 to 2020, Kirsten was an Obama Foundation Scholar at Columbia University in the city of New York. She is a European Young Leader and German Marshall Fellow.
Ain't no time to go to sleep. Ain't no time to go to sleep. There ain't no time to go to sleep.
Greetings from the island of Samsø in the middle of Denmark. I've brought you today to my balcony so you can see my view from my house, where I spend part of my time. I divide my time between Samsø and Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. So Samsø is Denmark's renewable energy island. It was named so in 1998 by the then Minister of Environment. And it's a great story about how communities can come together and make a great, bold vision a reality in 10 years. I want to just show you where we are on the planet. This is Northern Europe, and you can see Denmark there in the middle of Scandinavia. And in the middle of Denmark, we have the island of Samsø. Samsø is approximately 114 square kilometers and with just less of 4,000 inhabitants. So it's a small island with a remarkable story. Samsø is mainly agricultural farmland and has been historically. But in the 90s, there was a crisis because the only slaughterhouse in the island was about to close, and therefore lots of jobs were at stake. Many people would be out of work, and there was a discussion on the island. So what is the future here for us? And then this call from the government came out and for a renewable energy island. There was no funding with this title, but Samsø put their name in and said, yes, we will take on this challenge. And they won the competition, but with no money for the investments and with no concrete plan for how they were to implement this vision. So visionary people on the island brought together stakeholders and started to discuss how will we make this a reality? How will we find the investment? And though there was some reluctance in the beginning from both local citizens, but also from businesses on the island, with a great effort and a lot of coffee drinking, they actually managed to have the support from both the farmers who ended up investing in the wind turbines and placing them on their fields, and from the local plumbers who saw also a business opportunity in being part of carrying out this big plan. And from local citizens, because many local citizens also ended up investing in the wind turbines and thus gaining some of the both economic and of course environmental reward from this transition. So in 10 years, Samsø actually managed to become self-sufficient with renewable energy, both with onshore wind turbines and offshore wind turbines, with solar plants and straw-fired plants that would provide the households with heating. And the situation actually is now that Samsø is producing more energy than they can consume themselves. So they are also transferring surplus energy to the mainland of Denmark. So an incredible story of how political leadership from the government, a call for this competition that of course also came with an incentive scheme and subsidies for renewable energy, and with local pioneership that managed to bring people together around actually making this vision come true. The situation now in Samsø is that we are now looking at how we can make sure that the green transition doesn't stop here, that we also move on to look at our transportation on the island. Currently, there are not many electric vehicles here because we don't have enough of these charging stations, and the price, I think, of electric vehicles is also part of that equation. So this is one of the next steps. Another next step is the agriculture and food production here on the island, which is still conventional and not a lot of organic farming. I'm part of this project where you can see a photo here from one of the fields where we've established a foundation that buys up land and converts it to organic community-owned farms, run by young farmers that otherwise wouldn't be able to settle down as farmers because the price of land is also very high. So I believe this community-owned farming is organic farming is also part of that next step of the green transition, so that we will be able to provide the island with healthy organic products that are grown here on the island and consumed here on the island. So also strengthening that link between producers and consumers on the island. Samsø is known for the potatoes that are grown here, but most of them unfortunately are not organic or produced in a sustainable way. So this is part of the next step in this journey. I think the lesson here from Samsø is that if we want these radical transitions to happen in a short time frame, which is the challenge that we're facing all over the world, we need both top-down policy regulation from governments, and we need political leadership. And then we need local pioneership and this bottom-up effort that makes our local communities deliver what it takes, the concrete actions and the behavioral changes that are needed have also to come from bottom up. So it has to be a combination. So what I'm focusing on, since I left Parliament in 2019, I have been working with the global goals and implementation of the global goals. And to my experience, the Sustainable Development Goals have the strength of having become a new language that is spoken all over the world about sustainability. And I believe it gives us a brilliant framework to start this conversation about how we can take something that is so big and so global as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted in the UN, and take that and look at how can we actually use that as a framework for local action. So I guess it's the old saying of think globally and act locally, that the Sustainable Development Goals can really help us think about how to do that. So I have established a do tank for the 2030 agenda. We call it 2030 Beyond because we work towards 2030, but of course our vision is longer term. We work beyond borders, beyond political and cultural divides to bring people together around action for the SDGs. We work both with governments and governance and accountability to make sure that the agenda is implemented politically, and we work with civic engagement to make sure that we have this top-down, bottom-up interaction that is needed to make sure that we actually succeed with this transformation. So one of our main programs is a global network of parliamentarians for the global goals, PFDG, where we invite parliamentarians from all over the world and all levels of government to join our network to share their ideas and best practices around how to implement SDGs in parliamentary work. So it can be the structures of the parliament, how to embed the 2030 agenda in the political day-to-day works of parliament, how to keep governments accountable and perform parliamentary oversight functions. So this image here is from the Danish Parliament, where I founded the all-party group on the Sustainable Development Goals back in 2017. And we actually managed to mobilize more than 1/3 of the parliament in this network. And this is what we're looking to do on a global scale now. As I mentioned, we also work with civic engagement platforms, and we run the SDG platform at the Danish People's Festival, which takes place in another island of Denmark, Bornholm, every year in June, where we invite people for 3-4 days of debates, talks, workshops, cultural events around SDGs, and to encourage people to act. So for me, there is a clear link between the local pioneership that happens around sustainability and the political agenda of the SDGs that can help us frame that conversation that we need to take place everywhere on every levels to make sure that we deliver on our promises of sustainability. I will leave you with this beautiful image from sunset in Samsø, where you can see some of the wind turbines, because to me, the story of Samsø really represents that that proof that we can actually succeed in a short time frame if we mobilize our energy and our best resources to achieve our goals. So thank you very much for having me, and I wish you a beautiful day. Thank you.
Ain't no time to go to sleep. This ain't no time to go to sleep. This ain't no time to go to sleep.
Thank you. Philip Boyet D. currently serves as Chief of Staff for the Vice President of the Philippines. Prior to assuming that role, he has always been at the forefront of promoting social change and action, both in the Philippines and abroad. From 2006 to 2010, he served in various capacities at the Team Energy Center for Bridging Leadership of the Asian Institute of Management, which focused on developing leaders and mobilizing stakeholders to tackle development issues. In 2010, he became the head executive assistant of then Secretary of the Department of Interior and Local Government of the Philippines, Jesse Robredo. In 2015, he graduated from the Master in Public Policy program of Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for this opportunity. Good morning, everyone, or as we say in Tagalog, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. In June 2017, I was in the southern tip of one of the more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines to visit a school. To get to the school, we had to ride motorcycles through rugged, unpaved terrain. And going to the school in one direction took 2 hours. There was a lot of up and down through the motorcycle ride, but through it all, there were majestic views of uninhabited mountains and fields on both sides of the unpaved road. My destination for that day was Magsaysay Elementary School in one of the underprivileged villages in the municipality called Hinubaan. Through the generosity of partners, the Office of the Vice President was able to build 2 classroom buildings there to replace the makeshift classrooms that parents and teachers working together built with their own hands for the benefit of the children of the community. Another partner donated school supplies, good for the entire school year, for all the students of the school. I had the chance to speak to the contractor that built the classrooms while I was there, and they told stories of how they had to transport all the building materials using the motorcycles as well, going back and forth the same rugged terrain just to build the school. I had the chance to trade jokes and play with some of the children while I was there. And it made me realize something very important that I carry to this very day. Of course, they were happy about the school. They were happy about the classrooms and the school supplies that we brought. But I think what made them really happy that day is the fact that somebody took the time and effort to visit them. That despite their hardships, they were not invisible, that they were remembered, that somebody noticed despite how remote the community was located. In the Office of the Vice President, we are able to visit places like Magsaysay Elementary School and make people feel that they are not forgotten through the power of partnerships and working together. This story is just one of the many other stories of impact under our anti-poverty initiative called Angat Buhay, which literally means to uplift lives. Our initiative focuses on the daily pain points That unfortunately is the daily reality still for most communities in my country, like ensuring that they have enough food on the table for their families or that they are able to access healthcare when they most need it. In the Philippines, as with most island nations in this part of the world, addressing these development challenges, which are complex on their own, are made even more difficult because of the challenges of climate change and the onset of natural disasters. The Philippines is visited by 20 typhoons every year on average, and some of them are unfortunately terribly devastating. Just last year, toward the latter part of the year, there were 3 consecutive typhoons that battered many parts of the country. The Office of the Vice President has one of the smallest budgets bureaucracy with a limited mandate because traditionally the Vice President is appointed to a cabinet position. But politically, our office has been sidelined since 2016 because presidents and vice presidents are elected separately in the Philippines, and the vice president, my boss, happens to be the leader of the opposition. Vice President Robredo's marching orders to us in her staff at the very start of her term was crystal clear. We cannot let the 6 years of her term pass by just doing ceremonial functions like giving speeches or cutting ribbons, just because she was not appointed to a cabinet post. Being politically sidelined and having a limited mandate or having a limited budget are no excuses for delivering public service. We had to be creative. We had to be innovative. That is why we launched the anti-poverty program Angat Buhay, and the secret weapon was partnerships. By working with the private sector organizations who not only had the resources, but also the expertise, we were able to expand our reach and multiply our efforts, making our presence felt in local communities throughout the country, like in Magsaysay Elementary School. It is this same spirit of partnerships that fueled and really gave life to our various programs to respond to the challenges of COVID-19. And just to note a few examples, none of us in the Office of the Vice President are transport experts, but we were able to launch a free shuttle service for frontliners in less than 24 hours at the height of the lockdown after hearing harrowing stories of frontliners having to work for hours just to be able to report to their hospitals. We were able to do this thanks to a partner who was in the business of running shuttle buses. None of us in the Office of the Vice President are online selling experts, but we were able to launch an online market service allowing affected community market stall owners sell their products online in a safe and efficient way, giving them that extra income that they so needed to compensate for the massive decline in foot traffic in the community markets. This is again thanks to a partner who developed an online selling platform. None of us in the office are health experts or even medical professionals, but our most recently launched initiative provides medical consultation to underserved populations as our contribution to decongesting hospitals in Metro Manila due to the recent surge of cases that we've been experiencing. And this is thanks to the thousands of volunteers, including doctors, who signed up to help. From our experience, we know this truth. Partnerships are powerful. If as community leaders, we are serious about making an impact on social outcomes like better health or better resiliency, one sector, much less one leader, cannot make a substantial impact on their own. Our social problems are simply too complex. We need more of us to marshal the different kind of expertise that are necessary to address the divergent needs found at varying levels of society, including at the household level. But don't get me wrong, for all of its virtues, partnerships are hard work. The transaction costs are high, it takes a lot of effort to communicate and constantly align, and interests get in the way. But from our experience, we also know this truth. it is worth it because ultimately it allows us to do more with more for more. Let me end by sharing some 3 key lessons from our experiences in building and sustaining partnerships. The first is that we should never underestimate the value of relationship building. In fact, our ability to solve problems increase exponentially with our ability to build meaningful and strategic partnerships and relationships. The reason why our office was able to launch programs right away at the height of the pandemic is because of the relationships and partnerships that we've been nurturing since 2016. The second is that resources at our disposal considerably broaden through partnerships. There is complementation and collaboration, enabling us to attack a challenge from multiple directions, increasing the chances of success. Finally, partnerships live and die on trust. The work we've done have attracted goodwill in partners because of the credibility of the Vice President. And this is a credibility that is earned. And we consistently attempt to maintain that by delivering on the trust with transparency, accountability, and most importantly, measurable impact. Thank you very much for your time, and may our islands and causes indeed rise together through partnerships. Good morning to everyone.
Masi Philip. Liang Chang's concern about climate change is for future generations. Starting from 2009, he has joined various international NGOs, including participating in UNFCCC's 15th Conference of the Parties, or going for public speaking on different stages of his climate stories. He always believes that future generations can change the world, and he even put himself to different countries for exploration on different perspectives, including across the ocean project in South Pacific Islands in 2010 for Sea Level Raising Witness, or 2041 project to Antarctica in 2013 for Ice Melting Investigation Tour. He thinks everyone will have creative, infinite possibility at the co-created learning space. So he continuously dares to put himself to new adventures, and now is fully engaged with Climate Movement Builder as 350.org Asia Managing Director.
All right, good day, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I would like to start with small stories today about why I'm supporting climate justice. So 350.org is supporting the climate movement on the ground, believing people's power to fighting for fossil fuel industry. So we believe that people's power can overcome through our demands. We strongly highly demand for the fast transition for 100% renewable energy and craving for new solutions for our new generations. And secondly, we are demanding for no new fossil fuel projects anywhere around the globe. And also we're working on a lot of the investments and asking for not a penny to investment in fossil fuel industry anymore. So why 350 for me? I need to start with the first stories that I actually joined one of the protests in Taipei, in Taiwan here. So when I was still studying, I was still playing guitar. I remember there was a day about to rain, and then I just come back out of my hometown, actually Haga, So I talked to my mother saying that I'm going to join the protest supporting our climate change movement. And she was telling me why you're supporting them and what is the number of 350 means. So I was starting to join the action and learning, asking the people around me and the young people, like I was 20 ages, and saying that, why you're here, why you are joining this, why you are doing this, why you're doing these actions. And after I'm asking like the 14 people, and I'm starting to realize the power is inside me, and starting to realize that I am actually can be the one of the people and to lead that supporting other people to join the movements to change something. Even though I'm still not so sure how I can support it. So I started to investigate how the civil society across the globe, across from Taiwan to another. So I joined the climate change conferences in Doha in 2012. During the typhoon story struck in Taiwan, like Philip mentioned about the typhoon strike in Philippines. So there was a strong typhoon in my hometown, destroy all the forest I love. When I was little, I tried to talk to my parents and learn from my grandparents about how I communicate with the nature. So when I was alone, when I was back home, I usually will talk to the forest. So I was with my teammates on the global level to share those stories about how important the nature and the forest means to me. And then I started investigating and hearing other people's stories, and I saw this. This is the picture of foreign Tuvalu, one of the islands and one of the friend of Taiwan in the South Pacific. And as Taiwan, that we are also an island country, I noticed that the sea level has been increasingly striking in our nature and in our lives in different ways. So I starting to see these coastal erosions, how this palm tree collapse and how those impact to their future generation, their kids. And starting to document those stories and trying to share back when I come back to Taiwan. And I started to investigating why there's sea level rising. In Taiwan, there's not much ice on our land because of the weather and because of our locations geographically. So I joined one of the projects called 2041. They try to cultivate the leadership for future generations on those people who've been witnessing, who is believing in people's power, then they should have the power to change what they believe. So I joined this journey to document the more stories from Antarctica, from one island to another, and starting to share those stories to the younger generations. After doing the sharing, I feel like, wow, they're so impactful cases and also a lot of that stories that we can share around. One of the stories that 350 does was we're supporting some islanders to share their stories from their ancestors, like I did. Like I was Hanga, like I do have my culture to respect my ancestor and also my culture. So we're supporting this story. If you can Google and search that from one to another, then you will find a documentary from two lovely ladies. They are writing poem to respect their stories from their lands. And I saw that documentary and realized that, oh, I'm not just one small individuals in Taiwan, but I can also share those stories like many, many younger generations in the video and documentary. So how I work at this moment for climate justice in reality is that we are standing up for people's power, like our Pacific team strongly demanding the fossil fuel industry not investing through their culture, through their fighting dancing. And we blockade those fossil fuel industry to that then realize that the people's power and demand are really much important, because we believe that fossil fuel industry, they might need those assets or those investments to the system. So we ask for system change. We ask for no more new fossil fuel projects. We ask for climate justice through different ways of actions. Through art, through creativity, through nights, we're holding our lights and to say about what we want. And we ask for numbers. We calculate numbers, how much money that we can divest from fossil fuel industry. And we translate, localize those languages in Mandarin, in Japanese, in Korean, in all the different island countries like Taiwan, to support them that understand that coal and fossil fuel are not our options. But also we realized that during the COVID period, if we cannot have really face-to-face meeting, then those relationship building is really hard. So we're trying to share those stories via video and visuals, by having a gesture across saying no, through some of the booklets to spread out to the campuses, to those younger kids, that then realize that, oh, actually we can do more than that. And we also talk about solutions by open up the space with the bankers. Some of the banks, some of the investors are wondering like how the younger people think about their money. So we're talking about how the interest, how the investment, how the venture can invest in more green jobs here and there. And we provide trainings for those younger generations here in Taiwan as well, for that they know that they're part of the global movement, they're part of the Asian movement, they're part of the islanders, that we need to remember who we are. Like many others kids around the globe, when we joined in the climate strike, we were supporting them, that then realized that they can share more wider stories. And now actually starting tomorrow, we are also starting another new conversation for just recovery globally. So during this pandemic, we realized that actually it's a very, very good opportunity and chances for us to using our local knowledge and to expanding that to our wider principles. And actually there are 5 of them. As my personal actually background is from health, but I'm supporting people's having their health first for sure. And through the climate change movement, we realized that actually the economic growth and economic relief is really, really needed to directly to the people. And for our laborers and workers in our communities, it's really, really also crucial for them to realize that actually they deserve a better options for their future work and their lives. And then very importantly, to have the resilience for our community. And really, resilience can be translated in different meaning for different communities through different future crises. So we also having that conversations happening. And also to be part of the global parts, we stand strongly on our solidarity with the community across the borders. So that's briefly sharing a nutshell, but I'm happy to have deeper conversation with all of you. Thank you for having me today.
Julian Uggen is an Indigenous human rights lawyer and writer from Guam. He is the founder of Blue Ocean Law, a progressive firm that works at the intersection of Indigenous rights and environmental justice. He is brilliant, soulful, and deeply engaged in the struggles of peoples across Oceania to liberate themselves from colonial rule, defend their sacred sites, and obtain justice for a range of harms inflicted upon them by outside forces, from nuclear weapons testing and non-consensual medical experimentation to extractive industries and climate change. He serves on the Global Advisory Council of Progressive International, a global collective that launched in May 2020 with the mission of mobilizing progressive forces around the world behind a shared vision of social justice.
Time to turn down the lights. You're gonna be just fine. Calling somewhere over.
Half a day. It's so nice to be with you all today. I'm honored to take part of this panel. So today I sort of wanted to switch it up and actually read from an entry from my new book. I have it here. It's entitled The Properties of Perpetual Light. And in reflecting on today's theme, I thought that it would be really nice and special to read the eulogy that I wrote for the great Marshallese statesman who spent his entire life fighting for nuclear justice and later in life, climate justice as well, from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Uncle Tony DeBroom. And I thought it would be fitting not only to honor his memory generally, but because he was actually the keynote speaker for this very conference back in 2016, shortly before his passing. So I would like to honor him by reading this with all of you. Good evening. I must start by saying it is an honor to be here with you to celebrate the life and legacy of one of the greatest men many of us have ever known, Uncle Tony DeBroom. Though I called him an uncle in life, he was more like a father to me, as he was to so many of us gathered today. I met our father about 10 years ago. I was in Majuro doing research on a book I was writing at the time, and he had generously agreed to sit and talk with me, as he'd done with hundreds of others before me and hundreds more after me. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were over at Thai Table Restaurant at the Hotel Robert Reimers. We had lunch, fried fish, several cups of coffee, and even shared a slice of banana cream pie, which I have to say was rather good. Anyway, he patiently fielded a whole host of questions about the devastating nuclear testing here and the ongoing struggle for reparations and redress. We talked for hours. Well, he did most of the talking about everything from the nuclear tests themselves to the decades of non-consensual medical experimentation that followed, from his lifelong campaign for nuclear disarmament to his beautiful wife, Rosalie, their 3 daughters, and their near dozen grandchildren. From our shared love of sashimi to his unshakable belief that the best big eye tuna in the world hails from here. He told many stories that day, but one of them shook the ground beneath my feet. He told me about the morning of March 1st, 1954. Quote, I was fishing for mackerel in the morning with my grandfather when the bomb was dropped. I was 9, but something like that you never forget. I was carrying the basket for my grandfather. I don't know how to describe it, but we knew immediately that something was wrong. We knew that tests were being done, bombs were being dropped. We had seen and heard some of them before, but this was different. Everything seemed to happen within a few seconds. It was not a boom. Atomic and hydrogen bombs don't do that. They don't boom. They rumble like thunder. The sky turned completely red, and this was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was like someone had put me and my grandfather in a glass bowl and poured blood in it. The beach was red, the ocean was red, the fish in my basket was red. I peed in my pants. I grabbed my grandfather and he threw everything down and half carried me back to the house. My aunt normally ran our household, but she was not on Likiep at the time. She was on Majuro. My grandfather gave me and my cousin 2 pieces of rebar to go bang on the community bell, which was an oxygen tank hanging from a tree, calling everyone to the house. We were so confused. It was supposed to be daylight, but it was deep red like blood. I could not know then that this story would change the course of my life, or that this man, whose warm eyes gleamed with equal parts mischief and magic, would change the course of history itself, and not only for his own people, but for all of us. It would be about 8 years before I would watch, along with the rest of the world, this same man become the driving force behind the High Ambition Coalition, which would secure global consensus in the 11th hour of the 21st Conference of the Parties, resulting in the Paris Agreement and giving Pacific Islanders everywhere a fighting chance. You know, 1.5 to stay alive. Thankfully, our father's contributions to the global struggles for nuclear and climate justice were recognized in real time, as evidenced not only by his Right Livelihood Award, aka the Alternative Nobel Peace Prize, and later his nomination for the actual Nobel Peace Prize, but also by the glowing tribute that the editorial staff of the New York Times recently wrote in his honor. I was fortunate enough to spend time with our father before he died. When our sister Doreen called me to let me know he was sick and being treated at Straub in Honolulu, I quickly sorted my affairs and went. In the weeks leading up to his death, I sat by his bed, stroked his hair, talked to him, mostly just thanked him for teaching me how to see and how to fight, for loving me fiercely and from the start, for calling me son. One of the greatest acts of my life was procuring the urn that would hold his ashes. When Doreen asked me to choose his urn, I knew it had to be lovely but simple. He would have wanted that. And then after an afternoon of avid searching and with the help of a few good friends, I found it. A wooden urn with a warm hue and a simple but stately inlay of mother of pearl. A fitting vessel for carrying the body of a beautiful soul to sea. I'd like to end my remarks with a poem I wrote sometime after that day at Tide Table. One of the things I loved most about our father was his ruthless insistence that young people who take up the mantle of social justice work realize that though we must respect those who came before us and cleared part of the path, we must also learn to trust ourselves to find our own way in the world. That, and to remember that in the face of injustice, there is nothing more important than impatience, because the time for justice is always now, because power concedes nothing without a demand. Frederick Douglass may have issued that reminder, but it is our father who never let us forget. Justice and patience are not exactly friends, but nobody knows this more than the Marshallese. They who watched the world turn red and the rain turn into a terrorist, whose thyroids were taken, as were their voices, but not the love of singing or the memory of song, who buried too many beautiful babies to count, who've been denied not only big things like reparations, remediation, and a promise of return, but little things too, like arrowroot flour and the flesh of coconut crabs, who waited for years by the seashore for some small boat of deliverance to dock. They know the bitter truth. Waiting is empire's favorite game of all, and patience, a parka of loneliness to wear on an island with no chance of snow. Thank you.
Darling, time to turn down the lights. You're gonna be just fine. Calling somewhere over.
Situs Ma'asi, Julian, for sharing that moving and powerful piece with us. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Soetoro back to the screen as we cultivate a dialogue, stitching together what we've just heard. Dr. Soetoro, what are your thoughts after hearing our speakers today?
Thank you so much, Cara. And you're doing such a beautiful job, by the way. It was wonderful to hear all of the profound work and insights of these Obama leaders and the things that are different but also shared between them are so powerful and tremendously important. Te Puoho urgently reminded us, and poetically too, as he always does, to be connected in our knowing and doing, and to ask ourselves every day if we are being good ancestors, if we are making mokopuna decisions with the grandchildren at heart, if we're being intergenerational in our thinking, the distant horizon in our view. He said, Taiao ora, tangata ora, where the land thrives, so do so too do the people. And this is such an important thing for so many of our islands. We must move from that extractive economy to a reciprocal shared economy modeled after indigenous economies, where self-determination is at distant horizon, to which all aspire and are entitled. Kirsten shared the remarkable lessons of Samsu. Her talk convinced us that in order to make radical transitions and take big steps, we need both top-down and bottom-up action, political will and vision combined with local activism and mobilization of resources. And her organization, 2030 Beyond, utilizes the global goals as a framework and language for just that. Her do tank and cultural festivals, I love, let's duplicate that. They work beyond political and cultural divides to offer inspiration and models that can be applied, I think, in many communities to mobilize energy and resources. Philip's talk helped us to remember the importance of remembering, seeing, and listening to those who have too often been ignored or marginalized. He underscored the intersectionality of being in poverty while going through natural disaster or climate change. He shared the reality of frontline communities and emphasized the need to be creative and determined. So much to be done in underserved communities, about partnering with civil society to address community challenges. I feel like this talk should make us all feel brave, because it showed that, you know, everyone needs to participate, but also has a point of entry given the complexity of social challenges in order for all of our islands to rise. Liang Yi's talk spoke about cultivating leadership for just sustainable recovery of our islands and localizing climate justice in the climate movement. He underscored the importance of helping young people to be a part of the global climate movement and connecting through multimedia communications. You can, using that local knowledge and principles to help communities feel resilient and powerful, like they have something to contribute as they stand in solidarity on a global stage. You know, when we were talking before this conference, he shared a beautiful and poetic story with me about his ancestral and indigenous land. You heard him say he's Haka, and he returns to touch the trees of home and to speak to the forest in his native Haka. And those sounds of intimacy and devotion are at the heart of his movement, not the English of coalition building necessarily. It's that song between Liang Yi and his forest that gives the movement meaning. And I'm sure that intimate language of connection is understood by many here today as the important heart of effective activism and advocacy. And Julian, I can't say enough about his book. Please do buy it and support it, The Properties of Perpetual Light. He reminded us so powerfully today of our deep responsibility to those who've worked and struggled and loved before us, our responsibility to all that we have inherited from them. On the inside cover of Julian's book, it says, he is a lover of the sea and people with sea secrets in their eyes. I just love that. And that is the gift I believe this conference can offer us. You know, this notion that, you know, we can bring and come together, you know, island people who experience water in so many ways and who know its secrets can have so much to share. Water helps everything to grow, obviously, but it can also be destructive. It erodes, but it also washes us clean and bathes our spirits. And I feel like, given the complexity of the water that surrounds us, you know, we can see water as a metaphor for these leaders. They become the water, and all of you as well, you island leaders, at once gentle, like raindrops on our cheeks, but then also really powerful, able to carve through rock. So I feel like you contain all of the power, all the creativity of water itself, all the malleability. You water people tell stories that make us all feel buoyant, and you are the carrier of secrets that can save us. So thank you for this time and for all of those talks, which were incredibly valuable. And now I'm grateful to be able to ask a few questions that I will hope stimulate discussion and allow for more stories to be shared. These questions can be answered by any of the panelists. And so I'll just ask that you bravely interject rather than having me call on you. And my first question is this: you are all powerful navigators. And as navigators, you perhaps have ideas about where do we go from here? After this conference, after this time, after COVID, after, who and what should we put in our canoes right now as we prepare to move into tomorrow? What is your advice on that?
Let me share a few thoughts about that, Maya. First of all, thank you for such a beautiful stitching together of the different stories that we've shared this morning. It's always so inspiring for me to hear from fellow Obama leaders. It's a continuing reason for why I'm so grateful for being part of that convening in 2019. It's always a pleasure and honor to hear their stories. With regard to that question on where do we go from here, I think it's important to remember that this pandemic and everything, the extent of the challenges that we are facing now has really forced us to rethink a lot of what we thought to be common sense or conventional wisdom. And I'd like to actually connect this with one of the points that TP was emphasizing when I was listening to his talk about we have to be more mindful about how interconnected everything is. Prior to the pandemic, it's been a constant topic of discussion of how much inequality has grown within our own countries and in different parts of the world. And I think the pandemic has shown us that inequality is simply not sustainable. The health of one person affects the health of everyone else. If we cannot find a way to see the interconnections about the different things that we're doing, then we are not able to benefit humanity in general. And I think part of what is striking to me is that in rethinking the conventional wisdom now, part of the answer is actually going back to ancestral wisdom. Part of the answer is actually looking at knowledge that we've always known to be true, that is well and alive in indigenous communities, and making sure that they now become what is conventional rather than what we've come to know as conventional wisdom now. So this pandemic has forced us to rethink how we should operate, has forced us to rethink how we should structure our societies. Despite its challenges, it's an opportunity that we can seize so that we can really build a more humane, a more equitable world, which is what is needed for us to live sustainably anyway.
And thank you very much, Philip. I thought that was really well said. And I just want to harken back to one of the lines that I just loved from Julian, was waiting is the empire's favorite game of all. I mean, we're in a time now when the entrenched incumbent thinking that has locked us into this downward spiral towards inequality is fractured. A lot of the systems have been exposed for what they are. And if we are courageous and empathetic, we can take advantage to shift the systems to be more reflective of this collective prosperity to which so many of us aspire. If we do need to be able to take advantage of this, let's be honest, it's probably once in a decade opportunity to reset the ledger of how we measure what our success is as societies. I think we certainly, if we are able to capture the urgency that we saw in response to COVID towards that other looming threat that threatens all of our islands in terms of climate change, how do we maintain the momentum and the collective action, that bias towards action that we saw through COVID into the other prescient threats that threaten all of us? That is the next stage of what we need to do: maintain momentum and walk towards the fire to make the changes to the system that currently exists.
Thank you. Those are beautiful answers. And you are highlighting that, this is a moment that requires, I think, that we lean into our discomfort, walking into the fire, so to speak. And, this event certainly has illuminated some of the challenges that you have each dealt with in your work, and some of the barriers that you faced and had to overcome or surmount or get around. And so my next question is, what advice for one another would you give, sort of in your in sort of navigating difficult conditions? Is there a piece of advice that you would impart to one another, having heard more about some of the challenges of leadership in your various spaces?
At a risk of being overly verbose and taking up time for the panel, one piece of advice that really helped me was this idea that you write your values in pen and your strategies and tactics in pencil. So for me, I'm driven to change the world for my Māori people. That's what's written in pen for me. And the way that I do that, the pathway that I take my career and how I interact with the community, those are my strategies and my tactics that are written in pencil and can be adjusted on the fly to make sure that I'm still moving towards that grander ideal of what my values are. So I think there is, in a pretty turbulent world, there's a lot of comfort and confidence that you can derive from knowing what's written in pen for you. It's a source of stillness and peace for me, often when I'm facing these hardships and difficulties and barriers. So we can take solace on that, on what's written in pen, and then go out and break the wheel and try to be innovative in the strategies that we're implementing in order to get there.
I guess I'll take the next crack. I sort of want to go back to the other question as well. I'll just try to quickly do them both. I think for the first question, I think it's so important to do the work of elevating the perspectives from the margin. I think that's exactly where we go from here. Is we immediately enfranchise those who have been so long disenfranchised, So we need to elevate the perspectives of the most vulnerable members of our communities. And we don't, and we really need to amplify their voices, because oftentimes they know precisely what they need, but they're not getting enough support, I mean, we need to sort of really shift that. And it's Mari Matsuda in Hawaii would call that looking to the bottom, but we need to do that and to pull them up and in. I think that's crucial. So for example, I think the perspectives of Indigenous Pacific Islanders have to be made front and center to the global climate justice conversation. There's really awesome entry points that have been made and really successful campaigns that have been led by Pacific Islander youth, but we have to find ways to, to take that even further, for sure. And then the second question is, I just want to be really frank. 2020 was such an exceedingly terrible year and a terrible and difficult time for so many of us, right? But that's why I sort of started writing the book. So for me, I realized that one of the struggles and challenges I was going through was I was just trying to keep my heart from hardening. I know that sounds really basic, but I felt like death and destruction were like looming around every corner, and I could just feel it. It became quite palpable for me. I felt like I could have, it could have fallen into a sense of despondency, sort of with everything that was happening in Guam last year, instead I tried to channel in this way. And then it became very clear to me midway through the book what I was trying to do. I was trying to write a book that could function like a little bridge, that could help like young people in particular from this part of the world, make a crossing. They can like walk over my bridge walk over my book to get to someplace better, and I think that's why the last thing I would say is like, I think we need to be more aware that we have to lean on our artists in hard times. I think that, it's really our artists who not only remind us who we were, but remind us who we can still be, and are usually calling, us to this better, to make that crossing. And I think artists really help us in ways. And I think we need to start valuing that more than we do. So.
Just to add, and to answer the question a bit differently, Maya, with your permission, because just hearing from the talks of the fellow speakers, I got so much advice for what I'm going through. To connect to the earlier point that Julian was raising, and also to Kirsten's sharing about community-based solutions, I think that's very, very important advice. The Vice President is a firm believer in the power of participatory and inclusive governance. Good governance should equate to participatory and inclusive governance. And one of the things she always says is that those who suffer the problem the most has the best ideas on how to solve the problem. And I think that really ties to Julian's point about we have to make marginalized voices, you have to take them front and center. Because, we have this saying, if you're part of the problem, then you're not part of the solution, right? We have to turn that on its head. What we're saying is that you cannot be part of the solution if you're not part of the problem. If you don't have ownership over your participation in the problem and how you can therefore be part of unlocking and addressing those challenges. There is a very helpful concept that I've learned when I was studying in grad school, and it's the concept called positive deviance. And the idea is that more often than not, the solution to a problem we're trying to solve is already existing in that community. We just have to find that positive deviance, understand how it works, and give that support and investment so that we can replicate it further. So I think that is something that is important for us to remember, the power of local community-based solutions, because they would know better in terms of addressing these challenges.
And if I can add just 3 things quickly. I think with Obama leaders, I always want to show and say my appreciations. Like Billy mentioned, I think I still remember our time to connect like today with many of you here. It's a start. And then we keep talking and trying to dive deep for more solutions, conversations. I was chatting with some of the participants already, like exchange contacts and trying to find each other on the app of the conferences to remind each other that we need to challenge each other sometimes. Sometimes we need to push each other to the edge of the outside of the comfort zone. Remember us like we have more responsibility for this challenge altogether. That's really also helpful for me to working with this society having the crazy mindsets. Second, I still want to remind everyone just having the diversity because I think throughout the pandemic, we see the new opportunity coming up. How can we as the leaders to push that ourselves to those new opportunities? I think is really, really important. And the last but not least, I think time and attentions are very, very crucial for the people at this moment. So how can we get those attentions from the people to those needed gap problems? I think it's very important. I just also think of that and to remind each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Cara, please feel free to also jump in because you have wonderful insights as well. I feel like you've really done a beautiful job of reminding us, all of you, that we have to test our narratives and our political and environmental strategies have to be grounded in a deep understanding of community, culture, nature, and must be characterized by urgency, but also careful listening and true commitment. And so I wanted to ask you, as you consider the strength and ingenuity of island people, but also acknowledge your vulnerability as island people, can you speak about what has required the greatest courage in your life and your leadership? And then speak a little bit about what, where you have found and how you have built your courage.
All right, I'll give it another go. I'm trying not to go first, but here we go again. I think for me, the greatest mission and courage for me, and having spoken to other young people in similar positions, is this idea of stepping through our self-conscious sense of inadequacy into leadership positions. I think often with our island communities, we have a cultural leaning towards humility and not wanting to be individualist, and oftentimes we get seen to be, if we are being aspirational towards leadership positions, that can be seen at odds with that. We have a saying that I was raised on, kaore te kumare kōrero ki tōna reka. The sweet potato doesn't speak of its own sweetness. And so this idea of humility is driven very strongly through our generations, and that can be a barrier towards moving towards our potential as leaders. But I think that humility is often misunderstood. C.S. Lewis, the author of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, he described humility not as thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so it is not to be disparaging towards your own abilities, but to contextualize them in the success and prosperity of others, that we're able to maintain our sense of humility, but also to reach our potential. So we can't be afraid to let our light shine. It is our birthright to be leaders, and it is our responsibility to be leaders. And the courage that it takes for each of us individually to find comfort with that is something that's our own personal journey, but we can also take solace in that we are all experiencing the same thing, and that it is a shared discomfort and pathway that we're all journeying on.
I think I can jump in next. I will share two ways. What I used to debate with my friends, how we sustain our courage. The first, I think courage is to make your own choice. Everyone can make your own choice to stand on stage, to be really brave. There's also your decision, depends on your value. I remember when I think I picked up the song, was from the Sunflower Movement from Taiwan, where I sat in with a lot of young people inside the parliament to ask for what our demand. And I talked to the friend next to me, new friend actually, why you're here to make a decision to sit in here at this late night. And he shared that, well, I think there are others are here, so I think I should be here. So I feel like sometimes we make our choice to be brave is because of others, or sometimes it's because of yourself. And how to sustain being courageous, I feel it's about balancing. How to balancing to take courage sometimes, to make decisions sometimes, carefully with those conflicts. In a society, I think in my team, there are some staff are having some conflict to each other. So sometimes people are hesitating to take leadership or being brave. Or in the community, in the front line, as islander, you feel like, oh, I'm so lonely. How can I balance in between, should I take a leadership or should I make a decision now? So I think to learn from each other, to hold your value is also very important with care and what the society needs.
For me, I'd like to speak about the power of a community of leaders, of how we draw strength and inspiration from each other. In fact, that's a big reason why I was so thankful for the Obama Fellowship convening. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity, for example, to have regular check-ins with fellow Obama leaders in the Philippines. We have all unique experiences, but sometimes it's enough to know that other fellow leaders are struggling like you. Sometimes it's enough to know that even if there's nothing concrete you can say in the way of an advice or suggestion, just because a fellow leader is hearing your story or knows what you're going through, that's enough encouragement and that's enough inspiration. So I think we have to build communities where we can sustain our courage, communities that can continue to challenge us. As the Yangi was saying a while ago, these communities are not just sources of inspiration and strength, but they have to be communities as well that remind us of why we're doing the things that we're doing, the values that are important to us, and the causes and the fights that we want to dedicate ourselves to, and drawing courage from there is important. The other thing that I would mention is that, especially as struggling or aspiring leaders in our own works and communities, it takes a lot of courage to admit that you don't have all the answers. That sometimes as a leader, all that you can do is ask the right questions and let the answers emerge. And it takes some of the pressure off from what you're trying to do, but I think it also becomes an opportunity to tie in more people, tie in more voices by exercising, as Maya, you were saying, leadership is listening a lot of times. And I don't think that gets emphasized enough, because normally when people talk about leadership, it's about having the answers. It's about listening to the leader to say, to know where we should go. But I think increasingly, especially as I try to navigate all the things that we need to do in the context of our work, humbly I can say leadership for the most part is asking the questions, not having the right answers, and facilitating having meaningful conversations about the right questions that should be answered.
I think everything that everyone has said has resonated with me in general. I also believe that courage is contagious. When you're in community with people who are just doing really badass work, you're really inspired by it. I know so many amazing people in my direct profession, other human rights lawyers doing really, really good work for various communities. And, when I see them, step up and put their dreams on the line, or litigate cases that are hard to win, but it's important, they remind us that it's not about always fighting the fights we can win. It's about fighting the fights that need fighting, and when people step up, you step up. It's like one, sort of, it's almost like, how when one person yawns, another person yawns, and then everyone's yawning. It's the same sort of phenomenon, I think. I've seen it on the ground in community with other activists. I've seen when one person is in bloom, it's so clearly evident. And then you just see another person that impacts. And then pretty soon, all the flowers are blooming, so I think it is contagious. And yeah, I think we need to just, take hope and take inspiration from our fellow leaders, especially the ones who are taking on really, really tough adversaries.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you have all given me courage, truly, and I know that you've done the same for many people on this call, or on this, at this conference, rather. You really have invited people to think, and you've invited small revolutionary shifts in their thinking, and reminded them not to give up, and to deepen their sense of meaning and purpose, to stay connected, and to focus not only on what has been lost, but also on the gifts that we still carry wherever we go in the flow. So thank you for your wisdom and for making all of these flowers bloom. Thank you to Cara for your beautiful introductions and moderation, and Austin, Tori, and to all the conference organizers for the opportunity to share this time together. And see you, Ase, and back to you, Lauren, and aloha.
Sizuas Ma'asi to you, Maya, Cara, and all the Obama leaders and Obama scholars that shared their innermost selves that steered how they moved through this world to affect change that ripples across our vast oceans.